Hey there, I'm Mattea Roach. Welcome to Bookends. If you've ever taken a creative writing class, you'll likely be familiar with the rule, show, don't tell. It's about revealing character through action and showing who they are rather than simply telling the reader. And when it comes to crafting compelling characters who feel and sound like people you might know, Curtis Sittenfeld is a master. Curtis is the best-selling author of novels like Prep and romantic comedy. Her work often explores insular worlds, like a Massachusetts boarding school or the set of an SNL-style sketch show, or what it's like to be a powerful woman on the world stage. Whether her characters are politicians or schoolgirls, Curtis writes about the messiness of modern life and the complexity of human desire and emotion. And she definitely does that in her new book, a short story collection called Show, Don't Tell. The book features stories about women mostly in middle age, facing down life's absurdities, joys, and disappointments. Curtis was in Toronto to launch her new book, and I was so pleased to have her join me in studio. Hi, Curtis. Welcome to Bookends.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Now, matters of the heart, I would say, are at the center of your new story collection and also at the center of your recent novel, Romantic Comedy, which centers on this woman who has aspirations of writing a rom-com screenplay, and she's working at this SNL-type show, as I mentioned. I understand you grew up in what some might call the golden age of romantic comedies, the 80s and 90s. Were romantic comedies important to you?
Well, I do feel like the story of people falling in love, to me, is pretty much always a very juicy story. I can't tell if it's almost like wired into me as a human or if it's like my absorption of pop culture.
Right. Like which came first, the chicken or the egg kind of thing?
Yeah.
Whether romantic comedies made you or you were drawn to them because of the person you are?
Or whether I think like courtship is the most riveting story because that's what sort of movies and books told me, or movies and books told me that's the most riveting story because it is the most riveting story.
Do you have any standout rom-coms that have been formative for you?
I love the TV show Starstruck. It's a very similar premise, actually, to romantic comedy, where it's like a woman in England who's actually from New Zealand basically falls in love with a sort of rising movie star. By the way, are you familiar with the TV show, the HBO show Somebody Somewhere?
I have watched the first episode and did not continue, but I am familiar with it. It's one that's been on my list.
Oh, is it? Because I am in the second season. I love it. It's like a show that centers friendship in an almost romantic way that I just love.
What do you find interesting about that? What draws you to that kind of story in comparison with the more traditional romantic comedy where often a man and a woman getting together and the turbulence and then often payoff of that relationship is central?
In some ways, the romance is like enticing because often it's this portrayal of extreme closeness, which is a very intense experience. But I actually would say that friendship can be a different kind of very intense closeness. And I think that Show, Don't Tell, definitely more than being sort of a celebration of romance, is a celebration of middle-aged friendship. Like, and the friends that you've known for many decades, or, people that you were very close to in your teens or 20s, and then you're still thinking about experiences you had with them when you're in your 50s.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that actually, because there is this real through line of there's a lot of close female friendships, especially in the stories in Show, Don't Tell. And you wrote this essay for The Guardian recently where you talked a bit about this idea of friendships in midlife, that they can become very strong and very foundational for a lot of people, that they're what help you weather maybe some turbulences in your relationship or things like loss of a family member. Can you talk a bit about how you came to a point where you wanted to write about this?
I mean, certainly in my own life, my friendships are incredibly important to me. And the friend that I walk with almost every Saturday morning, and then the friend that I walk with on Sunday morning, that's more like on a monthly basis. But in both cases, it's like pouring out our souls. And like one of them, we walk for an hour and a half and then we stand in front of her house because like we're not finished covering it all. And it's just, I have kids. I have an older mother. A lot of people I know also have kids. They also have aging parents. People's marriages are not always stable through their 40s or before or after that. So there's just like all kinds of life challenges that come up. And I do think, I mean, this is such a sort of obvious thing to say, but such a true thing. Like having people to confide in and talk through your experiences can really make you feel so much better, even if the external experience doesn't change.
There's a real preponderance of stories in Show Don't Tell that feature either marriages that are breaking down or marriages that are facing a significant challenge, maybe because of infidelity or almost that more like emotional cheating where there's no affair, but there's perhaps the potential that someone's going to stray. I guess I'm interested as to why that was the sort of tension that you wanted to explore.
I mean, I think what you're saying is accurate. And I think in a larger sense, this is my second story collection. And I sometimes think if I had had story collections come out when I was in my 20s. So I was also in my 40s for my first story collection, which was in 2018. I think I would have written stories that were more different from each other for the sake of being different from each other, almost to like prove to the world that I could. And these stories are very much about like being middle-aged, being like American, Midwestern, mostly female protagonists. In many cases, like I kind of, if I'm like slightly making fun of my own book, I say it's mostly about like grouchy, liberal, Midwestern women. And so I do think that I'm kind of approaching similar characters from slightly different angles. I mean, I think it's just like all writers have their own preoccupations. And I do think a certain kind of like intimacy and marriage and family life and relationships is one of my preoccupations.
Some of these stories feature characters who are reflecting on experiences in their late teens or early 20s, but they're doing so from middle age. How does it feel as somebody who's been writing for quite a while and who did, a creative writing master's, as did one of your characters in the titular story? How does it feel to dive back into that period of time from the perspective of somebody who's in their 40s?
Well, I feel like the passage of time is sort of the ultimate plot twist. And if you see a person and you haven't seen them for like 20 or 30 years, it's kind of wild and fascinating, even if they have done not that much that's like objectively interesting. I mean, of course, everyone's lives are interesting in their own way, but a person can like barely have left their house for 30 years and it's still like, oh my God, they're 30 years older and they barely left their house. Like that's its own story. That's part of it, just that like we become more ourselves, we become less ourselves. And then I guess also I'm sort of fascinated by the fact that we can have an experience or like an interaction with another person and nothing about that changes. It's, in a way, it's like frozen in time. And again, like 10 or 20 or 30 years passes and our interpretation of that experience or that interaction can completely change. Like it can be like, we were very resentful of the other person and then we realized, oh no, I was in the wrong. Or I felt like I was so rude, but that person was actually being incredibly sexist or whatever. So it's just, I sort of think it's interesting to like gain life experience or to go through moments of cultural shift and like the meaning of a moment in our own memory changes.
There's a lot of characters in these short stories that I would describe as pretty regular upper middle class types, but there's also a number of, I would say, fictional depictions of real famous people that you return to in your work. You've written novels that are inspired by Hillary Clinton and former First Lady Laura Bush, but you also, in Show Don't Tell, have this story about a couple that is very Jeff Bezos and Mackenzie Scott. I'm wondering for you as a writer, why do you enjoy turning a fictional lens on these real powerful people that your readers are going to have associations with already?
The first thing I would say is I think it's a teeny bit weird that I write fiction that kind of is inspired by real people. And I'll think that's a strange habit. But then I mean, again, it kind of comes back to I think a writer writes their preoccupations. And so in some cases, if I have some positive feelings about a public figure and some negative feelings, it's probably more interesting to me than if I have only positive feelings or only negative feelings. And I'll kind of think, what is the person doing in the cultural consciousness? What is the person doing in my consciousness? Why am I spending all this time thinking about that? What is the way that they're talked about? And if there is a real person and the person is so famous that I know for sure that you have heard of that person, I know you have your opinions. Maybe I'm reinforcing them. Maybe I'm challenging them. But it's a more interactive conversation that we're having, even if it's asynchronous.
I want to dig in a little bit to what my producer and I have been calling the Jeff Bezos story, but the title is The Richest Babysitter in the World.
I think we could say the tech billionaire mashup story.
Yeah, it's not just him, but it's this story about this internet entrepreneur. But really the protagonist is a young woman who's hired to babysit for him and his wife. It's 1997. The husband has just started this internet sales company. The wife is doing her PhD and being a bit of a homemaker type character, splitting her time. So it's before this couple becomes kind of iconic in the world of your story. Why did you want to look at this particular time in the life of a, future billionaire couple, and specifically through the eyes of this woman who's their babysitter and then subsequently falls out of touch with them?
Obviously, celebrity and fame come up sort of a disproportionate amount in my fiction. And if you said, you can wave a wand and be 10 times or 100 times more successful or more famous or something, I think I would say no, thank you. I mean, I actually don't consider myself to be famous at all. But I think that fame and celebrity seem like such an incredible double-edged sword. And again, I think I'm interested in things that I'm ambivalent about. Fame has a lot of perks, but it also has a lot of disadvantages. And if there's a celebrity who, again, is in our culture, how much are they acting fake? How much are they acting real? And some of that confusion leads to analysis or pondering for me.
Has your orientation towards the concept of fame changed at all since becoming a person who has a certain level of public profile? Were you always thinking about it, or have you started thinking about it more as it's become a concern that's relevant to you in your day-to-day?
I would not say it's a concern that's relevant to me in my day-to-day in the sense that it would be extremely unusual for a stranger to come up to me on the street and say, are you Curtis? And if it happened, it would probably be in the grocery store or whatever, it would be a very wholesome encounter. I mean, fame is such a huge part of our culture and, with the rise of influencers and whatever. But from a young age, I loved reading People magazine. If anything, I might have a much more nuanced view of it now where I've certainly met very famous people and it seems like a strange way to live, I think. What do you think?
I mean, there's a level at which I think it becomes very unpleasant probably to be famous, or at least I have the sort of personality where I would find it very unpleasant.
Yeah.
I know people who have a public profile who will get recognized, say, at the grocery store, and they love it. They really, really enjoy it. I've also met people that it is their least favorite thing that could possibly happen to them, and they just kind of have to grit their teeth and tolerate it because they know it comes with part of their job or with the profile that they have. One thing that I think about a lot is parasociality and the way that, kind of what you're describing of if you don't know somebody personally, but you have some sort of knowledge of them that allows you to form an opinion. I find it wild, the sorts of things that people will go on the internet and post about people that they've never met and the sorts of assumptions that they will make about people that they don't know.
Yeah.
And so that's something I think if I were to be a novelist, I might, rabbit hole and write a collection of stories about that. I don't know.
And what do you think is the sort of interesting aspect of that?
I think just the contradiction between the sort of public and private lives that people have. Like, you wrote in your Guardian piece about being at a literary festival and being the writer, and you're being approached in the context of being a writer. But then your friend who's there with you is like, you're the girl who holds my hummus if I need to dip my pita in the hummus. I thought that was such a funny anecdote because I've had that experience of being out with friends that are people that I went to college with. And they completely don't care at all that I'm somebody who might get recognized at the grocery store, and they roll their eyes when people stop me and talk to me in public.
Yeah.
And I find it very grounding, but also a bit of a head trip when that happens.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there also might be the question of like, if you get recognized at the grocery store twice a year, it might be like nice. And if you get stopped at the grocery store like every single time you go, at some point you become the kind of person who can't go to the grocery store. I don't anticipate that I will become that kind of person, but just because it's also, I think in my fiction, I'm often having an argument with myself where I'm kind of like, this is my opinion. And I'm like, then this contradictory thing is also my opinion, where I totally get and I think agree with the parasocial thing you're describing. And here I am like posting stuff on Instagram, after all my book tour events and kind of being like, this is the thing that happened behind the scenes. So it's like there is this phenomenon of sort of inviting people in and then saying, come a little closer, come a little closer. Okay, stop right there. Don't be any more interested. Like I have told you everything. And, human nature is human nature.
Mm-hmm. Curtis, there's another story in Show Don't Tell that I want to talk about, which was almost, to me, a horror story, and that's White Women Lol, which centers on this woman named Jill who becomes the subject of a semi-viral video. So it's fitting that we were just talking a bit about fame and how having your face in a video that people can see is a bit of a curse sometimes. Can you describe what happens to Jill and what sorts of consequences she encounters in this story?
So Jill is white. She is at her best friend's birthday party at a restaurant in a private room. And she comes out of the bathroom and sees about 5 Black friends sitting at a table. And she goes up to them and she says, you might not know this, but there's a private party happening. And she doesn't know. One of them, then starts recording her. And it turns out she is mistaken. The hours for which her friend's husband rented the room have ended. The party is over. She's sort of asking people to leave a public space. And so the next day, the video is online. And I actually don't name it, but I picture it taking place in St. Louis, Missouri, which is a city I used to live in. And and Jill considers herself to be liberal. And so she's horrified. And she does not consider herself to be racist. So she feels like, she has this sort of public identity as a racist person. And she is hoping to change that or redeem herself. And she finds a sort of unlikely path because a family in the neighborhood's dog has gone missing. And there's, like lost dog flyers everywhere. And it happens that it's the one Black family in the predominantly white neighborhood. So she thinks to herself that if she can find this missing dog, she can make everything right again. So it kind of follows her through. And in the meantime, she's kind of thinking, I'm not racist. I'm not racist. Wait, like, am I a little racist? Is that thing that I did that one time 2 years ago? Oh, and then that other thing I did 3 years ago.
This is a character who does something that I would describe as cringe and sort of thoughtless. But at the same time, she's kind of going on this journey of self-reflection. Like, how did you try and build this character in a way that felt sympathetic while also sticking the knife in a little bit? And I think perhaps making some of your readers who might be white Midwestern liberals think about perhaps their own role in similar situations.
It's funny because the question of quote unquote likability of characters comes up a lot. But I don't think I, as a writer, am ever trying to make a character likable or not likable. Like, I think I'm trying to say this is a realistic version of a kind of person who can exist. This is not everyone. This is someone very specific. And it's not unrealistic that a progressive white woman could do something racist and be kind of horrified at being called out and maybe like sort of recognize her complicity and sort of not recognize her complicity. And so it all just seems very plausible to me. And, you know, so many of those videos do exist. And I think I probably like saw them and thought like, you know, what is the person thinking or not thinking in this matter? Like, what do they think is happening? Because it's definitely not what the viewer thinks is happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this sort of reaction that I can imagine readers having is either a visceral, oh my God, I would never do this. This is unbelievable. I'm cringing. Or there might be an alternate read of, could I end up in this situation? Like, this could happen to me, and I should really think about why it is that I could accidentally put myself in this position.
Yeah, I think that's completely correct. And I think my writing, since my novel Prep, I feel like people have kind of said to me, like, I was so frustrated by this character and I wanted to like reach in and shake her shoulders. And with Prep specifically, it was like, she's so ungrateful for this incredibly privileged educational opportunity. And, you know, why does she self-sabotage? And then a lot of other people will say, I identified with her so strongly. And like, I always thought I was the only one. And, you know, I think that obviously people are different from each other, but I think that people also vary in their levels of honesty with themselves about their own maybe unattractive qualities.
Mm. I think growth and reflection is really central to a lot of the stories in this collection. In the title story, Show Don't Tell, you have this novelist who's looking back on her experience in a graduate writing program and some of the anxieties and rivalries that she dealt with in that environment. The main tension in this story, Show Don't Tell, is between Ruthie, who's the narrator, and this character Badveer, and both of them go on to become reasonably successful authors after this program. Badveer is this guy who goes on to become an acclaimed literary author, and throughout the story, he expresses a lot of opinions about women writers that I think are intended to be kind of shockingly misogynist, I guess. Uh-huh. What is his theory about women writers that he espouses?
So he basically thinks to be a good writer, a woman can't be beautiful because to be a good writer, you must be sort of hungry. You must have something to prove. And beautiful women don't have anything to prove.
Is this a perception that you have encountered from anyone at all, either in grad school or as you've made your way through the industry?
I have encountered it. And I think sometimes women can believe in it as much as men can. You know, like if you see a writer who's as gorgeous as a model, you do sometimes think, wait, what's going on there? Like, what happened in your life to make you a writer?
Why do you think that is? Why would something need to have happened, I guess, in order for a beautiful woman to be a writer?
I mean, it's funny because I think I agree like 12% with Badveer, like, which I'm not sure you can ever create a character and agree with them less than 12% and have them retain their humanity, you know, because otherwise at some point it's like character assassination or like straw men or something. This is an absurd generalization, but I do think that if you're like super comfortable in the world and you feel like there's a clear place for you and things make sense, you probably do not become a writer. Mm.
There's this dichotomy that you set up in Show Don't Tell where Ruthie, the narrator character, is reflecting on these grad school moments and reflecting on her career and then Badveer's career. She says, well, he wins literary prizes. He gets interviewed on public radio. She writes the women's fiction and novels that mothers read while recovering from knee surgery. This dichotomy was interesting to me because I'm both interviewing you on public radio, but also I think that perhaps you've been tagged a bit with the label of women's fiction. Is that something that's happened to you, and how do you feel about that?
So that is really funny, actually, that we're discussing women's fiction on public radio, like all of the above. I mean, things have kind of shifted over the course of my career. Like if my first novel came out 20 years ago, there's a lot of ways to answer what you're asking. But one way is if there was like a major prize in the U.S., it would have been unsurprising if, like, let's say there were 10 finalists and if like 7 or 8 were men 20 years ago or 25 years ago. And it would be unsurprising if it was completely switched now and only 2 are men or something like that. You know, the gender conversation is always evolving and things. You can look online and see that this book, Show Don't Tell, is partly classified as like women's friendship fiction. Like, what the hell is women's friendship fiction? Is there such a thing as men's friendship fiction? Like, so there's kind of like these absurd elements. And it kind of makes me roll my eyes. And then there's another part of me that's like, oh my God, like I have the career of my dreams. You are interviewing me on public radio. You know, I'm so lucky. And that the great majority of readers are not only women, but middle-aged women. Like I am my own demographic, you know, like it feels like this big like menopause party in my life right now, like menopause and publication. So I have mixed feelings about all of it, which again might be like, there's nothing I like writing about more than mixed feelings.
I think mixed feelings has been a real through line of our conversation today. And I would say that there is a real kind of like hard edge of middle age can be difficult. The passage of time can be difficult, but there's also hope in these stories. There's a lot of characters who are starting over anew or working on perhaps their marriages, working on themselves. There's a sense that there's a lot of opportunity and self-assuredness that can come with middle age. Is that something that you were trying to put across at all in this collection?
I absolutely feel that way. I don't know if I was trying to put it across or if it just came through in terms of my trying to depict a kind of reality that I see, which is, like, I think that middle age can be very painful. You know, like life will have its way with you no matter who you are. And it can be like really beautiful. And you can have these really close relationships, really close friendships. You can learn from your earlier mistakes. You can have these experiences as a parent that are so frustrating and then so deeply touching. And you can also kind of contextualize that like the good stuff should be savored and like you hope the bad stuff will pass. It might or might not pass. So I think that there are like dark and light elements of the collection, but I see middle age as like a really wonderful time, not like a depressing time, and not like I don't feel like it's kind of like, oh, well, just pack it up and then like, you know, climb in the coffin and wait or something like that.
I want to circle back as we wrap up this conversation to romantic comedy. We started off talking about that novel and how the main character is working on a rom-com screenplay as part of her arc. Is there ever going to be a Curtis Sittenfeld rom-com in the works? Like I could definitely picture with the way that you write dialogue that you could write a pretty crafty screenplay.
Thank you. Well, it's funny because romantic comedy is in development to be a film, and 2 screenwriters have written this script, and it's actually quite good and funny, and they're more professionally funny than I am. Again, it's been like 20 years of my stuff being adapted and then sort of not making it onto the screen. So I like being a fiction writer. I like writing short stories and novels, and I don't think that I'll ever like go to LA and write screenplays just because it just, I don't know. It's like, I like doing it by myself and like living in Minnesota. But I think in the fullness of time, something will stick and come to fruition.
Curtis, thank you so much for coming into the studio today. I've had so much fun talking with you.
Thank you so much. This was awesome.
Curtis Sittenfeld is the author of Show Don't Tell. She joined me in our Toronto studio. This episode was produced by Katie Swales with help from Barb Carey. Ailey Yamamoto is our associate producer. Our senior producer is Jacqueline Kirk, and our executive producer is Aaron Balser. A huge thank you to our audio tech Aronde Williams and to the entire CBC Books team. We could not make this show without them. If you're on the lookout for more conversations like this, you can check out our archive of interviews. A few months ago, I talked to the romance writer Casey McQuiston. Here's a piece of that conversation.
Here's the thing, is that there's often a moment I have when I'm reading where I see something that like electrifies me because I'm like, oh, I didn't know this was allowed. Like I didn't know, like the first time I ever read a romance novel, I was like, I didn't know that sex was allowed in books, you know, because sex was something that was so demonized and hidden away in like the culture I grew up in. And so I think a lot about like those moments of revelation where you're like, oh, something that I thought I had to be ashamed of, or something that I have a complicated relationship with, or something that makes me feel alienated from other people is something that is published here in this book. And there's like a level of comfort in being legitimized that way. And you see that and you're like, oh, this is allowed to exist. Like this is not something that I have to hide away. And I feel like for me, from my experience, a lot of my early relationship with like queerness and transness was concealment. And so representation to me means that I'm able to begin dismantling the little shelter built around my truest self.
You can hear the rest of that conversation on Spotify or the podcast app of your choice. Make sure to follow the show to keep up with some of the fantastic guests we've got coming up. And don't forget to leave us a review. It really helps to get the word out to others who might enjoy the show. You can always catch Bookends on Sundays and Wednesdays on CBC Radio. I'm Mattea Roach, and this is Bookends. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. Because when the book ends, the conversation begins.